let's talk about the problem with vaping. And I'm speaking to you guys as someone who once struggled with addiction to nicotine in the form of vapes, chewing tobacco, and at one point in my life earlier on, even cigarettes. I've now successfully quit, and I'm an addiction recovery coach who focuses on nicotine, THC, energy drink, and adult media content addiction. The problem with vaping is that every time you vape, you're getting the drug nicotine, typically in the form of nicotine salts. Nicotine salts enter your bloodstream at an extremely rapid rate and exit your bloodstream at an extremely rapid rate, about 2 times faster than a traditional cigarette or dip containing products that are not nicotine salt based. That's why the buzz from regular chewing tobacco as compared to Zyn pouches hits so differently. It's the nicotine salts. Every time you consume nicotine enters your bloodstream, and it's going to release adrenaline, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine, okay? Now, the first problem that we have with vaping is the release of the adrenaline and the other stimulating neurotransmitters. Nicotine can be a neurostimulant, a central nervous system stimulant. And what this does, especially in the amounts of the nicotine salts we're taking in a vape product, is it puts your body into a state of a fight or flight response. And when you're doing this all day long, over and over again, every 15 seconds, every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, you're eventually going to wear your body out. That level of central nervous system stimulation is required for moments of an intense need of physical or mental use, okay? But to constantly be putting yourself in a state of fight or flight all day long is going to be exhausting. It's going to lead to burnout. So the first major problem with vaping is the fatigue that it causes. Now that fatigue, that chronic fatigue, is actually increased over time because nicotine also disrupts deep sleep. I know for me, I used to browse on my phone, chew tobacco, and hit my vape every night before bed. Sometimes I was browsing content that wasn't so appropriate, right? Also really bad for the brain, also really bad for energy levels. And now you take being in a constant state of fight or flight response combined with disruption of your restful sleep, deep sleep from the nicotine stimulation, and you are setting up a recipe to be absolutely exhausted the next day. Now, here's the catch-22, and this is the trick that I fell for when it comes to addiction to nicotine. You wake up exhausted, and you're like, oh my God, I can't get my day going without nicotine. I need to rip my vape when I first wake up. Well, that's because when you go to bed overnight, your body's waking up in a state of withdrawal and detox. Overnight while you're sleeping, your body actually starts to detox nicotine. So when you wake up, you're waking up in active nicotine withdrawal. So you consume the drug, you suddenly feel better, you get that morning head rush, you get a burst of energy, and you say, oh my God, vaping makes me feel good. It gives me energy, and it made me feel alert. It snapped me out of that fog that I woke up in. Well, the fog that you woke up in was nicotine detox and withdrawal. And it's not actually giving you energy. Yes, it's giving you a little squirt of adrenaline and norepinephrine or epinephrine. But long term, doing that repetitively is what is making you so exhausted all the time. Now, if you're like me, you're also combining that with energy drinks and marijuana products, but that's for a different video, just making everything 1,000 times worse. So the major problem that I ran into with vaping was the constant state of fatigue. And when you're not fatigued, and when you're fatigued, you're not feeling energized. And when you're not feeling energized, it makes it harder to focus at work. It makes it harder to want to go to the gym. It makes it harder to want to do things in general. You become extremely demotivated when you're constantly suffering from fatigue and having to rely on a drug to get going. Now, when you first quit, yes, I'm going to be honest, that fatigue actually gets worse. A lot of this has to do with the drop-off in dopamine production, but that will pass. Once the withdrawals pass, I promise you're going to have more energy than you had before. That's, again, a topic for a different video. The second problem with vaping, dopamine. Every time you consume nicotine, it dumps about 150% more dopamine than your average activity. Now, that's nice at first, but over time, when you abuse any drug, including nicotine, your brain enters into a state of dopamine deficit. So now you're constantly sucking on this vape, on this nic stick, hoping to get dopamine. But your brain said at one point, hey, there's way too much dopamine flooding in right now. So your brain starts to down-regulate dopamine. And what happens when this occurs is we develop anhedonia. And this is a lack of joy in life. This is a lack of motivation. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that drives motivation. That's why you might feel motivated to do more schoolwork on your computer when you're vaping, because you're reinforcing it with the dopamine from the vape. But over time, when you abuse the drug, when you abuse nicotine, your brain goes into a state of dopamine deficit. And now, suddenly, no activities bring you joy. No activities are you're feeling motivated to go towards. This is where some people would rather, it gets to a point where people would rather hit their vape than go out. Hit their vape than, be intimate with another person. Hit their vape than do whatever. Just literally sit and scroll mindlessly and hit their vape, then go out and do any other thing. And listen, I was that person. I understand how that works. But over time, vaping, especially vaping, because of the amount of nicotine we're taking in, is going to lead to a dopamine deficit, which is going to result in a lack of motivation and having a lack of joy in life, a lack of finding pleasure in things. This is how addiction literally robs us from the things in life that bring us joy. Andrew Huberman describes addiction as the progressive narrowing of things in life that bring us joy. And I think vaping is no better example of this. Now, on top of it, the next problem with vaping is it increases our anxiety. So now, not only are you fatigued all the time and probably getting anxious because you're fatigued all the time and worried about your health, but all those times that vape is pumping you into that fight or flight response, it's also spiking your anxiety response. Now, compound that with the side effects of addiction. Not being able to breathe as well, not having energy to do the things you want to do, watching you piss money away on these products, on these drugs that are giving you literally nothing in return, only taking from you, only stealing from you. Your anxiety is going to get significantly worse. Now, the problem is a lot of people will quit, and I ran into this problem myself. And initially, the anxiety spikes because here you are getting rid of your vape, something that you've been relying on for a very long time. Now you've taken that away from your brain. So your brain panics because your brain views that drug just as important as water or food. That's why people freak out when they don't have their vapes. That's why I freaked out when I didn't have my nicotine products at first. Car keys, wallet, phone, vape, tin. If I was missing my tin or my vape, I'd freak out. That's normal when you first quit because your brain has to rewire new pathways. But I promise that acute anxiety that you're going to experience during withdrawal is way less problematic than the drip of anxiety that you're getting every day while you're vaping. Not to mention the anxiety that develops over the fear of what one's future health might look like if they continue to use this substance, right? And that's why I don't fearmonger a lot on this channel, because if I were to sit here and say, oh, vaping causes this problem and this and that, what happens? You become fearful. And how do you cope with fear and stress and anxiety right now? You vape. That's why we don't fearmonger on here. It doesn't work. It just actually feeds the addiction more. But there's no question in my mind that if you're watching this video, there is a fear and anxiety about what your future might look like if you continue to consume this vape years down the line. And that's a reasonable fear to have. So when people think, oh, vaping helps my anxiety, no, it's actually adding to it. And now what we're doing is we're using our vape to cope with the problems that the vape has caused in our lives, that nicotine addiction has caused in our lives. And this is the cycle of addiction, when we're treating the problem as a potential solution. This is the problem with vaping. This is why I am so passionate about helping people quit vaping. Now, every time I would quit, something would always happen to me without fail. And I'm going to tell you exactly what that something is and how to avoid it in the next video. If you don't want to catch me there, follow me into the pinned comment or the video description where you can learn more about our free and paid resources to help you quit vaping. I'll see you guys in one of those spots.